6 calm hours with a 14th-century Flemish lacemaker. Hey guys, tonight we begin with a quiet little corner of medieval Flanders where the world outside is busy and loud and full of merchants and clogs and horse dung, but inside a tiny workshop things move slowly and deliberately. The air smells faintly of beeswax and linen and dust, and there sits Sister Agnes by the same narrow window she has sat by for years. She is neither young nor old, just firmly in her middle years, and her hands are thin and pale, but steady as the day she first picked up a bobbin. Outside the sun drifts lazily across the cobblestones, and the canal reflects a lazy shimmer that nobody will notice except perhaps the ducks, but inside this room the sound of 48 wooden bobbins clicking softly against each other is the only rhythm anyone really needs. Click, 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 one after the other, like a muted heartbeat, and Agnes breathes in and breathes out, as if she is pacing her own small universe with the rise and fall of her chest. Every bobbin moves at its own slow pace, and every tiny knot she ties is deliberate, one per minute, or sometimes a half minute if the pattern demands it. You might think this is dull or unremarkable, but that is precisely the point. Nothing else matters here except lace. Outside wars rage and markets fluctuate, and nobles squabble over taxes. But inside this workshop, Agnes has conquered time, or at least convinced it to tiptoe around her. The lace is not spectacular or world-changing or worth a fortune. It is fine, thin threads forming shapes that will never be remembered by history except by the rare historian who notices patterns and patience and obsession. The sunlight hits the threads in just such a way that they shimmer faintly like dew, and Agnes adjusts the angle of her chair because she knows that even a perfect shimmer can be ruined by a crooked posture. Her eyes are careful but soft, and there is a faint smile that nobody will ever see because nobody comes here except her. Once or twice a day, a visitor might peek through the door and then retreat quietly because they realize that Agnes is not producing lace for them or for trade or for glory. She produces lace. For the click of the bobbins, for the slow nodding, for the rhythm of breathing and existence. Sometimes she hums under her breath, and the tune is medieval and quiet and utterly her own. Nobody would recognize the song, but it floats across the wooden beams like a lazy cat. Occasionally, a bobbin slips, or a thread tangles, and then Agnes pauses and tilts her head, as if considering the state of the universe for exactly 3 seconds, and then untangles it with calm precision. Nothing is rushed here. Nothing is loud. Nothing is necessary except the lace and the passage of time. Outside, a dog barks somewhere down the street, and the sound is sharp and intrusive, but here it is absorbed into the soft ticking of wood on wood. Agnes leans forward and ties a knot so small and neat, it could almost be invisible except to someone who truly cares, which of course is nobody. She leans back and breathes in and out again, and the bobbins click, 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 as if in agreement that the world can continue on without them for a few more minutes. The lace grows slowly, almost imperceptibly, like moss on stone, and Agnes does not rush it, and she does not speak of it because it does not need her commentary. She is not producing wealth or status or fame. She is producing calm and control, and the illusion that time itself has slowed. The wind comes through the window, faintly carrying the smell of wet earth and onions from the market, and Agnes notices this because she notices everything, but does not comment because commentary would break the spell. Every minute she counts one tiny knot, and every knot is a small meditation. There are 48 bobbins, and each moves differently, and each is held in its own rhythm, and Agnes is the quiet conductor of this miniature orchestra. She sips from a chipped cup of weak tea, and the steam rises gently into the pale light, and then settles down again, and nobody cares except perhaps the dust motes which float lazily. Sometimes she tilts her head and imagines what the lace might become, and then shakes her head gently because imagination is unnecessary when the hands know what they are doing. And so she continues hour after hour, adjusting threads, tying knots, moving bobbins in perfect, unremarkable harmony. Outside, a cart rattles over the stones, and it feels like a disturbance, but inside it barely registers, except as a minor change in the rhythm of the air. By the time she has reached 2 hours, the lace has grown just enough to be noticeable, but not enough to provoke excitement. This is deliberate. Excitement is not required. Calm is the only commodity, and she trades it in abundance. Her fingers are skilled but gentle, and the knots are small and precise, and the pattern is beautiful in its understated way because nothing here demands applause. Agnes pauses for a moment and closes her eyes and breathes in and out once more, and when she opens them, she finds a tiny knot that did not align, and she smiles faintly. because it is perfectly human and she will undo it tomorrow, or maybe not because the lace will forgive her in its slow and patient way. The clock outside chimes faintly, but inside it is irrelevant. The lace is timeless and Agnes is timeless, and the bobbins click, 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 as if marking centuries rather than minutes. She leans back and adjusts her chair and lets her gaze drift toward the window and notices a faint shadow that moves strangely, and she blinks and looks again and realizes for a brief moment that one of the bobbins has slipped entirely off the cushion and is rolling slowly toward the edge of the table as if contemplating escape. She leans forward and nudges it gently back into place and smiles faintly, and the world continues on as if nothing has happened, and yet something has shifted subtly. The lace is not yet complete, and she is not yet done, but a quiet sense of satisfaction settles over her like a blanket she did not ask for and did not need and yet enjoys nonetheless. Outside the market grows louder and the sun drifts lower, but inside the room the air remains still and calm, and the bobbins click, click, click in one tiny knot at a time. The world slows down, and perhaps the universe itself sighs and tilts its attention toward this small human perfection of routine. And just as she breathes in and out and ties another knot, she hears a soft scratching at the door that is unusual enough to pause her rhythm, and she looks up just slightly curious and slightly wary because the world rarely intrudes here, and when she turns her gaze fully, she sees something entirely unexpected that makes her heart tick a fraction faster, even in her calm and measured way. Agnes leans forward and tilts her head toward the soft scratching at the door, and for a moment the rhythm of the bobbins slows slightly as if even they are curious. She exhales slowly and lets her fingers rest on the lace as if willing it to pause as well. The door scratches again, and the sound is faint but deliberate, and it is not a cartwheel or a wind gust or the stray cat from the alley. Someone is here, and that is unusual. Agnes adjusts her chair very carefully so that she does not disturb any of the threads and rises slowly on stiff knees that remind her she is neither as young nor as limber as she once was. The scratching comes again, and now it is paired with a soft muffled voice that says Sister Agnes very faintly, as if testing the waters of her calm domain. Agnes exhales again and walks across the floor, whose wooden boards creak just slightly, and she reaches for the door latch and lifts it. Outside stands a boy maybe 12 or 13 years old with a dirty tunic and wide eyes that are both nervous and curious at the same time. He fidgets with a small bundle in his hands, and his boots are worn thin on the solace. Agnes squints and says hello softly, and the boy jumps slightly and mutters something about wanting to learn lace making. Agnes raises an eyebrow gently, because this is the sort of request that is rarely serious and often disastrous, but she lets him in nonetheless because she is nothing if not patient, and the lace can wait a few minutes for novelty. The boy steps inside cautiously and sets the bundle down on the floor, and Agnes notices it immediately, even though she does not speak. It is a small box of colored threads and some carved wooden bobbins that are clearly made by someone else, and she nods faintly in acknowledgement as if to say she sees, but she will judge later. He looks around nervously at the 48 bobbins clicking softly and the small incomplete lace that lies like frozen water on the table and says, "I want to learn just like you, Sister Agnes." Agnes does not respond immediately. She kneels slightly so that her eyes are almost level with his and studies his expression with quiet precision. There is eagerness there, but also impatience, and that is dangerous. Lace making demands neither of those things, and Agnes knows this. Finally, she says, "You can watch, and you can listen, but if your hands are fidgety or your mind wanders, the threads will punish you." The boy nods eagerly and follows her to the table and sits quietly as she resumes her position by the window. The bobbins click, 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 and the boy watches and imitates the movement very slowly with his own small fingers on his bundle. He fumbles slightly and a thread tangles, and Agnes reaches over and adjusts it, without a word, because correction at this stage is more about rhythm than instruction. The sun drifts lower and the light changes in the window, and the threads glow faintly in a way that makes everything feel soft and slightly unreal. The boy looks at Agnes and whispers, "Are they always like this?" and she nods faintly without taking her eyes off the lace, because yes, they are always like this, and yes, this is the point. The lace grows knot by knot and bobbin by bobbin as the room hums in a soundless symphony of patience. Hours pass and the boy begins to imitate the slow breathing and the deliberate knots, and for a moment, Agnes thinks perhaps he might survive this quiet apprenticeship. The market outside becomes distant and almost dreamlike in the air. carries faint smells of bread and smoke and wet wood, and none of it matters. Because inside there is only the rhythm of 48 wooden bobbins and one tiny knot every minute. The boy occasionally frowns when a thread resists or when a bobbin slips, and Agnes leans forward to correct it with careful precision as if handling a fragile bird. The sun finally reaches the far side of the window and the shadows lengthen, and she notices a faint glimmer in the boy's eyes that is either understanding or sheer exhaustion. She does not comment because she has learned that observation is more powerful than speech. Outside a cart rattles faintly, and the sound is absorbed into the click of the bobbins and the quiet breath of the two humans. Agnes sips tea again, and the boy mimics her gesture awkwardly and spills a tiny drop on the floor. She leans down to wipe it, and notices that even in this small imperfection, there is beauty. The lace grows steadily and the boy's hands begin to move more confidently, although still slowly and deliberately, and Agnes allows him a sense of pride because pride is useful if kept quiet. As the afternoon drifts toward evening, the window reflects the muted gold of sunset, and Agnes leans slightly forward to tie a knot that is so precise it is almost invisible. She exhales slowly and the boy watches closely and whispers, "I did that too," and she nods faintly without comment. The room is now a mixture of warmth and quiet shadows, and the bobbins click, 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 as if marking the slow passage of time like metronomes of patience. And then she notices something strange. A thread that should be taut has sagged slightly, and she tilts her head and traces it carefully and realizes that it is not just the thread but the pattern itself that seems to have shifted subtly. She reaches out with careful fingers and adjusts it, and the boy watches and leans forward and accidentally bumps another bobbin, sending it rolling dangerously close to the edge of the table. Agnes sighs softly and nudges it back into place, and the boy flushes with embarrassment, but she only tilts her head because mistakes here are a gentle tutor, not a punishment. Night falls outside and the shadows deepen, and the faint light of a single candle adds a warm flicker to the lace. Agnes and the boy breathe in and out in quiet synchrony, and the bobbins click, click, click in a rhythm that now includes two human hearts. And just as the boy begins to feel he understands something real about lace and time and patience, a sudden, unexpected sound comes from outside. The window is soft but distinct scraping that stops the world for a moment. Agnes freezes and leans slightly forward, and the boy follows instinctively. And together, they look toward the window and see a shadow moving strangely along the cobblestones, and Agnes realizes that the calm evening has been intruded upon by something entirely unaccounted for. Agnes leans slightly forward and narrows her eyes at the shadow moving along the cobblestones outside. It is tall and slow and oddly deliberate, and she notices that it does not belong to any merchant or stray cat she has ever seen. The boy beside her holds his breath instinctively, and she does not correct him, because holding your breath can be a small lesson in stillness and patience. The shadow shifts slightly as if considering the door, and then retreats just as slowly as it arrived, leaving behind the faintest echo of movement in the cold evening air. Agnes exhales softly and leans back into her chair and resumes her lacework as if nothing had happened, because here in this workshop the world may intrude but it cannot control the rhythm of knots and bobbins. The boy mimics her slowly, and the bobbins click, 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 and the lace grows knot by knot and thread by thread, and each movement is deliberate and meditative. And it is almost impossible to remember that there is a world outside this room. Outside, the streets are noisy and muddy and full of horses and shouting vendors, but here it is calm and quiet, and the only sound is the measured tap of wood on wood and the occasional faint breath of two humans who are learning the rhythm of patience. Agnes adjusts a stray thread that has begun to twist, as she notices with quiet fascination how every single thread seems to have its own personality, and that some of them resist more than others, and that is perfectly acceptable. The boy tries to adjust one of his own threads, and it tangles immediately, and he lets out a tiny sigh as she leans over without comment and untangles it with careful fingers, and the bobbins click, click, click in agreement with her touch. The candlelight flickers gently and casts long, thin shadows across the table, and the lace seems to shimmer softly as if approving of the calm diligence of its makers. Agnes sips her tea again, and the boy mimics the movement very slowly and spills a tiny drop that falls near a knot, and she smiles faintly, because even small imperfections are meaningful if approached with calm attention. Outside, the wind rustles faintly and brushes against the window, but it is a soft sound that does not disturb the pattern inside the workshop. The boy notices the flickering shadows and whispers, "Is the lace always like this?" And she nods faintly, because it is always like this, and it is never like anything else in the world. He leans forward and attempts another knot, and it is not perfect, but it is deliberate. And Agnes allows him this minor victory because deliberate is more important than perfect in the long quiet hours of lace making. Time passes slowly, and the room feels suspended in a delicate limbo where past and future have little meaning and only the present matter, which is the sound of 48 wooden bobbins and one tiny knot at a time. Agnes pauses occasionally to straighten her posture or adjust the candle flame, and the boy follows suit, and they breathe in and out, together as if practicing some secret ritual of attention. The lace grows imperceptibly, but steadily, and the pattern begins to take on subtle shapes that are pleasing in a restrained and gentle way. Outside, a distant dog barks once, and it feels intrusive, but inside it is absorbed into the rhythm and almost forgotten. Agnes leans forward and notices a knot that is slightly uneven and reaches out to correct it, and the boy notices and follows her movement carefully and mimics it with small tentative fingers. The evening deepens and the shadows grow longer, and the faint sounds of Flanders at night begin to seep in through the window, but they are distant and muted and seem almost part of the workshop rather than outside it. Agnes hums faintly under her breath, and the boy tries to imitate the tune and fails softly, and she smiles faintly because failure at this stage is more instructive than success. The lace grows and the bobbins click, 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 and each knot ties them into a quiet pact of patience and observation. Agnes leans back and looks toward the window and notices the shadow has returned. This time it is smaller and slower, and it pauses just at the edge of the street, and she tilts her head slightly to observe, and the boy notices the movement and leans toward her, whispering, "What is it?" And she says softly, "Do not be concerned, it is probably nothing," and then immediately regrets saying anything at all because curiosity is a dangerous thing in small apprentices. The shadow shifts and for a moment seems almost human, and Agnes notices that it carries a bundle of its own and that the movement is deliberate, but oddly cautious, as if it does not want to disturb the harmony of this tiny room. She exhales softly and leans forward slightly to tie another knot, and the bobbins click, 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 and the boy mimics her slow rhythm. The shadow at the window pauses and tilts slightly, as if acknowledging the quiet ritual inside before retreating slowly into the deeper shadows of the alley. Agnes lets her hands rest for a moment on the lace, and the boy mimics the pause instinctively, and she notices the small rhythm they have developed together is almost perfect. Night deepens outside, and the candle flickers gently, and the air smells faintly of wax and linen and the faint damp smell of the evening streets. Agnes sips her tea again, and the boy mimics the motion and spills a tiny drop, and she leans forward to adjust a knot and correct a bobbin, and the lace grows slowly and perfectly imperfect in the quiet of the workshop. They breathe in together and breathe out together, and the bobbins click, click, click in unison, as if acknowledging that calm and patience are the only forces that matter in this little world. The boy leans forward again and attempts a knot that is slightly misaligned, and Agnes reaches over gently to correct it, and the air feels thick with quiet, observation, and delicate concentration. Outside, the wind rustles the streets, and a distant cart rattles on cobblestones, but it barely registers here in this small suspended universe of lace and slow breathing. The candle flickers once more, and Agnes notices the boy's eyes are beginning to show the faintest hint of understanding that patience is not about speed or perfection, but about noticing and adjusting with calm. Just as the quiet settles into something almost like meditation, a soft scrape comes from the floorboards near the door, and Agnes freezes slightly, and the boy notices and leans forward instinctively, and they both look toward the door and see a small shadow moving inside the room, very faint and deliberate. Agnes exhales slowly, and the bobbins click, click, click in a rhythm that now feels slightly different, and she realizes that the calm universe of this evening may be on the verge of an unexpected intrusion. Agnes leans back slightly in her chair and narrows her eyes at the soft shadow that has moved into the corner of the room. The boy beside her instinctively freezes, and the bobbins click, click, click in a rhythm that seems to slow, slightly, as if sensing the small intrusion. The shadow is small and deliberate, and almost human-shaped, but it does not move with the easy rhythm of a living person, and Agnes notes this carefully because observation is the only weapon she needs. She exhales slowly and lets her fingers rest lightly on the lace, and the boy mimics her subtle pause because he has learned that hesitation is sometimes more important than action. The shadow shifts again, and she notices that it carries something small wrapped in cloth, and that it moves with an odd carelessness that does not belong in her carefully ordered room. She leans forward and adjusts a bobbin gently, and the click continues as if nothing unusual is happening while her mind catalogues each movement and shape of this silent intruder. The boy whispers, "Are we in danger?" as she shakes her head very slowly and says, softly, "No danger, only observation, because here danger is measured in threads and not in swords." The shadow pauses near the table and then retreats slightly as if testing the air, and Agnes notices the small pattern of hesitation and approves quietly, because hesitation shows caution, and caution is a trait worth noting. She leans forward and ties a tiny knot in a perfect rhythm, and the boy mirrors the motion, and the lace grows imperceptibly as the candlelight flickers softly across the threads. Outside the window, the wind carries faint smells of the evening streets, damp straw, and faint smoke, and inside the room there is only the sound of 48 wooden bobbins and the quiet breathing of 2 humans and 1 slow shadow. Agnes leans back and adjusts her posture and notices that even the shadow seems to pause when she moves her hands, and the boy notices this too and leans slightly forward to mimic her exact movement with small tentative fingers. The candle flickers again and the lace shimmers faintly in the soft glow, and Agnes sips her tea quietly, and the boy mimics the motion awkwardly and spills a tiny drop on the table near the edge of the lace. She tilts her head faintly and lets him leave it, because small mistakes are part of learning the rhythm of patience, and the shadow seems to observe this carefully from the corner. Time stretches and the room feels almost suspended, and the bobbins click 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 in a hypnotic rhythm, and the lace grows, knot by knot and thread by thread, and each movement seems to slow the very air around them. Agnes leans forward to adjust a particularly twisted thread, and the boy mirrors her carefully, and the shadow shifts slightly, as if acknowledging the quiet rhythm but not disturbing it. The candlelight flickers gently across the wall, and the boy notices tiny shapes in the shadows, and whispers, "Is that normal?" And Agnes nods faintly and says softly, "Yes, in all small corners of life there are shadows and shapes that do not interfere unless you let them." He nods and returns to his lacework, and the bobbins click 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 in unison, and the room feels warmer and softer and somehow larger despite its small physical space. The shadow moves closer to the table very slowly, and it becomes clear that it is not an intruder at all, but some small creature, or perhaps a very small person, or maybe just a trick of the light, and Agnes observes carefully and decides not to comment, because sometimes observation is better than naming. The boy glances at her curiously, and she tilts her head faintly and smiles very slightly and returns to her lace, because expression is more important than words in moments like this. Outside, the wind rustles faintly against the window, and the faint echo of distant bells carries across the streets, and inside the room the only sound is 48 bobbins and 1 tiny knot every minute, and the calm breathing of 2 humans and 1 tiny shadow. Agnes leans forward to tie another knot and notices that even the small movements of the shadow seem to have a rhythm that is almost compatible with their own, and she allows herself a quiet thought that perhaps even intrusions have their place in patience and pattern. The boy leans forward eagerly and ties his knot more carefully than before, and Agnes nods faintly in approval, because diligence is a small reward worth acknowledging. The candle flickers one final time, and the shadow shifts just enough to reveal a small bundle of threads that had fallen behind the table, and Agnes reaches carefully and picks it up and smooths it into neat order. And the boy watches intently and mimics the motion awkwardly, and the lace grows slowly knot by knot. Night deepens, and the outside streets become quieter and more distant, and the air smells faintly of damp wood and faintly of tea and linen and beeswax, and everything seems suspended in time. Agnes sips her tea slowly, and the boy mimics her very slowly, and the bobbins click 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 in unison, and the shadow moves ever so slightly closer to the window, as if preparing to leave, or maybe simply observing the quiet diligence of humans who have learned to bend time to knots and threads. Agnes leans back gently and surveys the lace and the boy and the small shadow, and notices a tiny knot that has been tied incorrectly, but is beautifully deliberate in its imperfection, and she lets it remain, because perfection is not the goal of patience. And just as she leans back and exhales softly, the candle flickers violently for a brief instant, and a faint draft sweeps through the room. And she notices the boy freeze, and the shadow tilt as if startled, and in that instant a single bobbin teeters precariously on the edge of the table, and time seems to pause as it hangs there for a fraction of a heartbeat before everything returns to calm once more. Agnes leans forward slowly and reaches toward the bobbin teetering on the edge of the table. Her fingers brush it lightly and she nudges it back into place with a deliberate care that makes the movement almost ceremonial. The boy beside her exhales softly and holds his hands over his own bundle of bobbins, unsure whether to move or wait. Outside, the wind scratches faintly against the window pane and carries the smell of wet straw, damp earth, and the distant smoke of fireplaces. The room is warm, dimly lit, and tranquil, and for a moment, it feels as though the outside world, with its carts, shouts, and clattering horses, has been suspended entirely. Agnes ties a tiny knot, careful, precise, almost invisible to anyone not looking closely, and exhales. The boy tries the same movement and fumbles, but he pauses and adjusts, repeating it slowly as if learning to speak a new language through his fingers. She watches him without comment. The candlelight flickers softly across the table, the lace shimmering in muted gold, and silver threads that catch the warm glow, each strand seeming to float between shadow and light. The bobbins click, click, click steadily, creating a rhythm so subtle it almost becomes part of the quiet breathing in the room. Outside, a distant bell tolls faintly, absorbed into the soft hum of concentration, and the streets beyond are quiet, their sounds muffled by the thick wooden shutters and stone walls of the house. The boy leans forward again, this time with more confidence, as if trusting that the pattern will forgive his inexperience. His small fingers carefully twist a bobbin and align a thread, attempting to mirror Agnes' fluid, deliberate motions. Agnes notices, tilts her head faintly, and allows the small victory to pass unremarked because patience, she knows, is more valuable than praise. The lace grows imperceptibly knot by knot and thread by thread, each movement a quiet meditation. The room smells faintly of tea, beeswax, damp linen, and the warm wooden floorboards. The boy takes a slow breath in, and exhaling in imitation, he begins to understand the rhythm of calm, the weight of quiet attention, the gentle necessity of small imperfections. Agnes sips her tea once more. The boy mimics her slowly, spilling a tiny drop near the edge of his bundle. She lets it remain because calm is always more valuable than minor perfection. She leans forward and adjusts a twisted thread, the movement so delicate it is almost invisible, and the boy mirrors her action. Learning not just technique but patience, the importance of observation, the quiet language of threads. The candle flickers and casts long shadows across the walls. The lace shimmers faintly in the glow as if acknowledging the careful attention of its makers. The room feels like it is breathing in rhythm with them, expanding slightly with each exhale and contracting gently with each inhale. Time stretches and folds over itself. The boy begins to find a personal rhythm, subtle and hesitant, yet unmistakably his own. Agnes allows this, observing without interference. Outside, distant bells chime faintly, their sound absorbed entirely by the rhythmic click of 48 bobbins and the deliberate inhalation and exhalation of two humans, entirely focused on one tiny universe of threads and knots. A small shadow in the corner has remained motionless for some time, almost like a quiet witness, curious and deliberate, responding without disruption to the rhythm they have created. Agnes notices a tiny imperfection in a knot she has just tied. She leans over and adjusts it, soft and precise, and the boy copies her movements carefully. Each adjustment is slow, unhurried, and deliberate. Outside, a faint rustle of the wind stirs the streets. Inside, nothing disturbs the flow of concentration. The lace grows steadily, knot by knot, thread by thread. Agnes breathes in and out, and the boy mirrors her, their motions synchronized almost imperceptibly. The candlelight flickers across the table and the threads, reflecting faint glimmers of warmth and color. Suddenly, a faint creak comes from the ceiling above. It is barely audible, yet it disrupts the delicate balance of attention. Agnes freezes slightly, her fingers hovering over the lace. The boy instinctively leans forward, holding his breath. In that brief moment, even the rhythmic click of the bobbins seems to hesitate, acknowledging the unexpected movement above them. The shadow of the ceiling flickers, light and dark playing across the walls, but it does not advance further. Agnes leans forward slightly, tying another perfect knot, signaling with her calm presence that attention, observation, and patience are more powerful than sudden distractions. Outside, the wind carries the faint scent of damp earth and wood. Inside, the candlelight softens and the bobbins click steadily once again. The boy leans forward, attempting another knot. It is slightly uneven, but deliberate and careful. Agnes allows it without comment because the deliberate imperfection is part of learning. The lace grows slowly, incrementally, and the room seems suspended in time. Every detail matters: the tilt of a bobbin, the angle of a thread, the soft flicker of candlelight, the rhythmic breathing of two humans, and the quiet presence of the shadow above. And just as Agnes leans back, taking a long, measured breath, she notices something unusual. A single knot near the edge of the lace seems perfectly deliberate, but entirely unfamiliar, as if something or someone has left a subtle mark in her absence. She pauses, eyes narrowing slightly, and the boy notices, leaning forward instinctively, holding his breath. For a heartbeat, the room is completely silent, the bobbins frozen in mid-click, the candlelight flickering gently, and the lace hanging between past and present, deliberate and mysterious. Agnes leans forward slightly, her fingers brushing the lace as if testing whether the strange knot is real or a trick of her imagination. The boy beside her leans forward instinctively, eyes wide, holding his own threads as if they too might be affected by this tiny disturbance. The candle flickers softly, throwing long, thin shadows across the walls and ceiling, and the bobbins click, click, click in their steady rhythm, seemingly unaware of the sudden tension. Outside, the wind carries faint smells of wet straw, damp wood, and distant fires, but inside, the workshop remains a cocoon of warmth, wax, and linen, suspended between time and attention. She adjusts the knot delicately, noticing how it does not match the careful sequence she has been creating for hours. The boy watches closely, attempting to mimic her delicate fingers, though his hands tremble slightly from excitement or uncertainty. Agnes does not speak. She knows that words would disturb the subtle rhythm of patience that fills the room. The lace grows slowly, knot by knot, thread by thread, and the shadow in the corner of the workshop remains still, like a quiet observer that has taken a personal interest in their calm. The boy finally exhales, a small trembling sound that seems to break the silence. But the bobbins continue their rhythmic clicking without pause. Agnes sips her tea, the warmth of it grounding her, and the boy mimics the movement, spilling a tiny drop near the edge of his bundle. She allows it without comment because calm is always more important than perfection, and small imperfections are the quiet teachers of patience. The candlelight flickers again, and the lace shimmers faintly, soft gold threads catching the glow. Each knot now carries with it the subtle lesson of observation, the quiet discipline of slow hands, and the awareness of small, unexpected intrusions. Agnes leans back slightly and surveys the room. The boy has begun to develop a rhythm that is distinct from hers, yet harmonizes perfectly with the slow ticking of the bobbins. She allows him this independence, knowing that real learning occurs when imitation gives way to understanding. Outside, a faint bell tolls somewhere in the distance, absorbed entirely by the subtle click of bobbins and the quiet inhalation and exhalation of the two humans in the room. Time seems to fold over itself, stretching imperceptibly as the lace grows. Then the shadow shifts again, almost imperceptibly, near the corner where the boy's bundle rests. Agnes notices the movement with the kind of careful observation that comes from years of watching threads resist, bend, and settle. She leans forward and adjusts a knot that is slightly misaligned, and the boy follows suit, careful and precise. The shadow pauses as if observing their synchronization, its presence neither threatening nor interfering. Outside, the wind whistles softly against the windowpane and the faint smell of evening rain enters. But inside, the quiet rhythm of 48 bobbins continues uninterrupted. Agnes sips her tea again, the boy copying slowly and deliberately, spilling a tiny drop near a knot which she ignores. The lace grows slowly, imperceptibly, and the candlelight reflects softly across the table, giving the threads a gentle, alive shimmer. She notices the boy's hands moving more confidently now, his knots slightly uneven but deliberate, and she allows him this minor imperfection because deliberate attention is worth more than flawless technique. The shadow seems to shift closer toward the table, curious but hesitant, its movements deliberate and measured, as if learning the rhythm of the room in its own strange way. Time drifts slowly, and the air in the room grows heavier with concentration, warmth, and the faint smell of wax and damp wood. Agnes leans forward to adjust a particularly stubborn thread while the boy mirrors her movements with painstaking care. Outside, the night deepens and the streets grow quiet, absorbed entirely by the workshop's cocoon of calm. The bobbins click steadily in perfect unison, each knot a tiny heartbeat of patience. Then, Just as Agnes leans back to survey their progress, the shadow shifts suddenly toward the edge of the table where the boy's bundle sits. She freezes slightly, her fingers poised in the air. The boy leans forward instinctively, holding his breath. The candlelight flickers violently for a brief instant, casting dramatic, dancing shapes across the ceiling and walls. For a heartbeat, the rhythm of the bobbins halts almost imperceptibly, acknowledging the subtle intrusion. Agnes exhales slowly and reaches for the shadow, realizing it is neither human nor animal but something small and deliberate, perhaps a falling piece of wax or a stray thread disturbed by the evening draft. She adjusts it gently, placing it back exactly where it belongs. And the boy watches, wide-eyed but calm, learning in silence the lesson that even minor disturbances can be approached with patience. The lace continues to grow knot by knot, thread by thread, and the rhythm of the bobbins clicks click click once more, steady, deliberate, and unbroken. Outside, the wind rustles faintly against the window, carrying the scent of rain and mud. Inside, the candlelight flickers, and the workshop is once again a sanctuary of calm. The boy and Agnes breathing in quiet synchrony, their hands moving deliberately, and the shadow gone, leaving only the lace, the bobbins, and the soft rhythm of patient, deliberate attention. And just as Agnes leans back and allows herself a small sigh, she notices a faint irregularity in one of the threads, tiny deviation that seems perfectly intentional, as if someone else had intervened in the calm world she had meticulously created. She tilts her head slightly, eyes narrowing, and the boy leans forward instinctively, holding his breath. The candle flickers, the bobbins click, and the calm workshop seems to hold its breath in anticipation of whatever subtle disturbance may come next. Agnes leans forward slowly, her fingers hovering over the tiny irregularity in the thread. It is so small it could have been a trick of the candlelight, but her careful eyes insist it is deliberate. The boy beside her leans forward as well, his small fingers hesitating over his own bobbins. The room is quiet except for the soft, steady click of 48 wooden bobbins moving in their slow, hypnotic rhythm. Outside, the faint rustle of wind carries the smell of damp straw and distant wood smoke. But inside, the workshop feels suspended, timeless, and insulated from all distractions. She adjusts the thread carefully, realigning it without haste, and the boy mimics her movements with careful concentration. The candlelight flickers gently, throwing elongated shadows across the walls, the table, and the lace, giving everything a soft ethereal glow. The lace grows knot by knot, thread by thread, and each tiny movement seems to stretch the very air around them. Agnes exhales slowly, feeling the familiar calm settle over her as the boy mirrors her gentle breath. The small irregularity is corrected, but it leaves behind a subtle lesson. Even minor disturbances can be integrated with patience and care. The boy's hands move more confidently now, his knots slightly uneven but deliberate. Agnes allows him these imperfections because deliberate attention is more valuable than perfection. Outside, a distant bell tolls faintly, absorbed entirely into the soft click of the bobbins and the synchronized breathing of the two humans in the room. The candle flickers again, and the shadow that had caused the earlier disturbance seems to linger faintly in the corner, motionless yet almost aware of the rhythm they have established. Agnes sips her tea again, the boy imitating her slowly, spilling a tiny drop onto the table, which she allows without comment. Each knot becomes a meditation, each thread a study in patience. The lace grows imperceptibly but steadily. Outside, the wind carries faint sounds of distant footsteps and carts over cobblestones, but inside, everything is absorbed into the careful rhythm of bobbins and hands. The boy glances at the corner where the shadow lingers, then returns his attention to the lace, his concentration deepening as he learns the quiet discipline of observation. Time stretches almost imperceptibly. Agnes leans forward to correct a twisted thread while the boy mirrors her movements precisely. The candlelight casts a warm glow, and the shadows of their hands and threads move softly across the walls. Each bobbin seems to have a personality, each knot a heartbeat, each movement a whisper of calm. Agnes notes how even the shadow in the corner appears to pause in response to their rhythm, as if it has learned to respect the quiet world they have created. A boy ties a knot that is slightly uneven, but deliberate. Agnes allows it without comment, knowing that subtle imperfection is part of the learning process. The lace grows slowly, knot by knot, thread by thread, and the bobbins click steadily in unison. Outside, the streets are quieting, the wind softening. The room feels suspended in its own timeless pattern, a cocoon of wax, linen, and concentration. The shadow moves slightly, just enough to remind them of its presence, then retreats toward the corner again, curious but unobtrusive. Agnes leans back and sips her tea once more. The boy mirrors the motion carefully. The candlelight flickers and the lace seems to shimmer faintly in approval. The bobbins click in their slow rhythm, filling the room with a sound so gentle it could almost be mistaken for breathing. The irregular thread from earlier has been corrected, but its lesson remains. Even disturbances, however small, can be incorporated with patience and calm. Then, without warning, a faint draft drifts across the room, carrying a whisper of cold air that causes one of the smaller bobbins to wobble ever so slightly. The boy freezes, and Agnes leans forward instinctively, nudging it back into rhythm with a gentle touch. Outside, the wind rattles the window pane softly. Inside, the rhythm is restored. The lace grows steadily, knot by knot, thread by thread, and the candlelight continues its soft flickering dance. Agnes notices a small imperfection near the edge of the lace, subtle but deliberate, almost as if someone has touched it without their noticing. She leans forward and adjusts it carefully, guiding the thread into place. The boy mirrors her movements, learning that observation and deliberate action can restore calm in even the tiniest moments of disruption. Outside, the streets are quiet, distant noises absorbed entirely into the soft click of the bobbins. The shadow in the corner remains, still and watchful, a silent witness to the delicate meditation of lace, patience, and calm. As Agnes leans back and exhales, she realizes the night is moving forward, and the faint scents of wax, linen, damp earth, and tea mingle quietly. The bobbins click steadily, the candlelight flickers softly, the lace grows, and the shadow remains. And then, just as the boy reaches for his next bobbin, a tiny flicker of movement catches Agnes' eye in the corner, a shadow shifting with intention, deliberate and slow, as if it has something to show, or perhaps something to take. Agnes leans forward slowly, her fingers poised above the lace, observing the subtle movement of the shadow in the corner. It shifts deliberately, as though it is measuring the rhythm of the bobbins and the slow, deliberate breathing of the room. The boy beside her mirrors her stillness, his small hands hovering over his bundle, waiting for her signal. Outside, the wind murmurs faintly against the window, carrying scents of wet straw, earth, and distant fires. Inside, the workshop feels suspended in a quiet cocoon of wax, tea, linen, and patient attention. She nudges a nearby bobbin slightly to test the rhythm, and the shadow pauses for a heartbeat, almost as if startled by the smallest interference. The bobbins click, click, click steadily, their gentle rhythm absorbing the presence of the corner, neutralizing its movement through sheer repetition and patience. Agnes exhales slowly and leans over a small knot that has begun to twist, smoothing it carefully, and the boy copies her movements almost instinctively. Each thread aligns with the next in subtle perfection, a testament to the quiet mastery of hours of repetition. The candlelight flickers softly, casting long shadows across the walls, ceiling, and lace. Outside, faint noises of distant footsteps and carts are absorbed entirely by the rhythmic click of the bobbins. Agnes sips her tea slowly, and the boy mimics her carefully, spilling a tiny drop onto the table. She does not correct it, knowing that calm and deliberate patience are far more valuable than small perfection. The shadow shifts slightly again, lingering at the edge of the table, observing, almost respectful of the rhythm and dedication in the room. Time stretches in slow, deliberate folds. Agnes leans forward to adjust a stubborn thread, guiding it gently back into alignment. The boy mirrors her movements, more confident now, his knots slightly uneven but deliberate. The lace grows knot by knot, thread by thread, and each small movement seems to expand the very air around them. Outside, the streets are quiet, absorbed by the workshop's cocoon of concentration. The shadow does not move further, but its subtle presence reminds them that observation can be patient and deliberate as well. Agnes sips her tea again, the boy mimicking her motion, and the bobbins continue their rhythmic clicking. The lace grows steadily, each knot a meditation, each thread a whisper of patience. The shadow seems to lean slightly toward the table, as if studying the boy's movements with quiet fascination. He notices, hesitates, then continues deliberately, understanding without words that even the smallest observers are part of the calm world they have created. The candle flickers once more, and the lace shimmers faintly in its soft glow. Agnes leans back, exhaling slowly, and surveys the room. Outside, the faint rustle of the wind carries the smell of damp straw and distant fires, absorbed entirely by the calm rhythm of the workshop. The boy leans forward, tying a knot that is deliberate but slightly imperfect, and Agnes allows it, knowing that subtle imperfections teach far more than flawless repetition ever could. The shadow shifts again, inching closer to the edge of the table, as if drawn to the growing lace, careful but deliberate, almost patient in its curiosity. The air grows cooler and heavier with concentration. Agnes leans forward, adjusting another knot with delicate precision. The boy follows her movements carefully, synchronized with the rhythm of bobbins and threads. Outside, distant noises fade into quiet obscurity. Inside, the workshop exists in a world of soft flickering light, slow breathing, and hypnotic clicking. Each knot builds on the last. Each thread is an extension of deliberate observation, and the shadow remains, a quiet, deliberate witness. Then, without warning, the shadow moves again, closer toward the center of the table. The boy freezes instinctively, his hands hovering mid-air. Agnes pauses, eyes narrowing slightly, observing the movement without haste or alarm. The candle flickers violently for an instant, throwing long shapes across the ceiling and walls, and the lace seems to catch the light in strange, unpredictable ways. For a heartbeat, even the rhythmic click of the bobbins falters, just slightly, acknowledging the presence of something deliberate, something patient, and perhaps something intentional in its intrusion. Agnes leans forward slowly and nudges the lace gently, guiding the irregular thread into place. The boy mirrors her movement carefully, learning that calm observation and gentle correction can restore balance to the room. The shadow retreats slightly, almost reluctantly, toward the corner again. The candle flickers softly, the bobbins click steadily, and the lace grows knot by knot, thread by thread. Time feels suspended, and the workshop breathes with the quiet rhythm of deliberate attention. And then, as Agnes leans back and exhales, she notices a tiny irregularity, a thread that seems deliberately out of place, perfectly aligned yet unfamiliar, as if it has been left by someone or something entirely unseen. The boy leans forward instinctively, holding his breath. The shadow in the corner shifts ever so slightly, deliberate and patient, and the candlelight flickers one last time, casting long, delicate shapes over the lace. The room holds its breath, suspended between calm and quiet anticipation. Agnes leans forward slowly, her fingers hovering over the tiny irregularity that has appeared near the edge of the lace. The boy beside her leans forward as well, his small hands trembling slightly over his own bobbins. The room is quiet except for the soft click-click-click of 48 wooden bobbins moving in their hypnotic rhythm. Outside, the wind rattles gently against the windowpane, carrying the faint smell of damp straw and distant fires. Inside, the workshop is a cocoon of warm wax tea, linen, and measured attention. She nudges a nearby bobbin slightly to test the rhythm, and the shadow shifts as though it is responding to her subtle movement. The boy watches carefully, mimicking her small gestures almost instinctively. The lace grows knot by knot, thread by thread, each movement deliberate, each knot a meditation in miniature. The candlelight flickers softly, casting long, thin shadows across the walls, ceiling and lace, giving the room an ethereal glow. Outside, faint distant bells toll, absorbed entirely by the rhythmic click of the bobbins and the slow, deliberate breathing of the humans within. Agnes sips her tea, the boy mirroring her carefully, spilling a tiny drop near the edge of his bundle. She allows it, knowing calm and measured attention are far more valuable than perfection. She leans forward and adjusts a small twist in the thread, guiding it gently into alignment. The boy follows her movements cautiously but with growing confidence, his knots uneven but deliberate. The lace grows imperceptibly yet steadily. The shadow seems to shift closer, hovering at the edge of the table as if drawn to the work, curious but patient, silent and deliberate. Time stretches slowly. Agnes adjusts another stubborn thread, the boy mirroring her movements with meticulous care. Each bobbin moves deliberately, each knot a tiny heartbeat. The candlelight flickers again, highlighting the subtle shimmer of the lace. Outside, the streets are quiet, the distant noises fading into soft obscurity. Inside, the room exists in a bubble of warmth, wax linen, and hypnotic concentration. The shadow shifts once more, inching closer to the edge of the boy's bundle, but it does not interfere, merely observes. Agnes leans back slightly, exhaling, and surveys the room. The boy ties a knot that is slightly uneven but deliberate, and she allows it. Knowing subtle imperfection teaches patience more than perfection ever could. The bobbins click steadily in unison. The shadow lingers near the corner, watching, almost as if it has its own rhythm that attempts to harmonize with theirs. The candle flickers, and the lace shimmers faintly, threads catching the light like soft, deliberate sparks. A sudden whisper of draft drifts across the room, causing one of the smaller bobbins to wobble ever so slightly. The boy freezes instinctively, and Agnes leans forward, nudging it gently back into rhythm. Outside, the wind rattles the window panes softly. Inside, the balance is restored. The lace grows steadily, knot by knot, thread by thread, and the candlelight flickers across the table, the walls and the shadows, illuminating their deliberate, patient movements. Agnes notices the tiny irregular thread again, the one unfamiliar and deliberate, slightly out of place yet perfectly aligned. She adjusts it carefully, guiding it into place with her long-practiced hands. The boy follows her motions, slowly internalizing the lesson that even the smallest disturbances can be corrected with patience and attention. The shadow moves slightly, almost reluctantly, returning to the corner. The bobbins continue their hypnotic click-click-click, each sound a quiet heartbeat of focus. Time drifts slowly. Agnes leans back, sipping her tea, the boy mimicking her cautiously, spilling a tiny drop which she ignores. Each knot becomes a quiet meditation, each thread a whisper of calm. The candlelight dances softly on the walls, and the lace seems to shimmer in quiet recognition of their focus. The shadow remains in the corner, patient, deliberate, and watchful, a silent witness to the slow unfolding of hours and knots. Then, just as Agnes reaches for another bobbin, the shadow shifts again, deliberate and precise, moving slightly closer toward the center of the table. The boy freezes, his small hands poised mid-air. Agnes pauses, observing it without alarm, her fingers hovering above the lace. The candle flickers violently for a brief instant, casting long, delicate shapes across the ceiling and walls. For a heartbeat, the rhythm of the bobbins falters almost imperceptibly, acknowledging the presence of something deliberate, patient, and unknown. Agnes leans forward and nudges a thread gently, guiding it back into perfect alignment. The boy mirrors her movements carefully, understanding without words that deliberate observation and gentle correction can restore calm to even the smallest disturbances. The lace grows steadily, knot by knot, thread by thread. The candlelight softens, the shadow retreats slightly toward the corner, and the room resumes its suspended rhythm, a cocoon of wax, linen, soft light, and deliberate patience. And then, as Agnes leans back, she notices yet another irregularity, a knot in the center of the lace that is deliberate, unfamiliar and almost purposeful, as if left there by the shadow itself. The boy leans forward instinctively, holding his breath. The candle flickers one last time across the delicate threads, and the room holds its breath, suspended between calm, deliberate attention and the anticipation of what may come next. Agnes leans forward slowly, her fingers hovering above the unfamiliar knot in the center of the lace. The boy mirrors her movement, frozen in hesitation. The candlelight flickers softly, casting long, delicate shadows across the table, walls, and ceiling. The room is otherwise silent, save for the hypnotic click-click-click of 48 wooden bobbins keeping their steady meditative rhythm. Outside, the wind carries faint scents of wet straw and distant smoke, but the workshop is insulated in warmth, wax, tea, and slow, deliberate concentration. She examines the knot carefully. It is perfect, deliberate, and yet undeniably unfamiliar. Her fingers brush lightly across it, adjusting slightly, ensuring it is aligned with the surrounding pattern. The boy watches with wide eyes, slowly mimicking her careful movements. The lace grows knot by knot, thread by thread, and each adjustment carries a quiet lesson in patience, precision, and calm. Outside, distant bells toll faintly, absorbed entirely by the click of the bobbins and the slow, deliberate breathing of the two humans in the room. Agnes sips her tea, the boy imitating her, spilling a tiny drop that she allows without comment. She leans forward to adjust a stubborn thread, her movements slow and fluid, and the boy follows, increasingly confident yet careful. The candle flickers, and the lace seems to shimmer softly, threads catching the glow as if acknowledging the dedication of its makers. The shadow, deliberate and patient, moves slightly closer to the center of the table, almost in quiet dialogue with the lace itself. Time stretches in slow, careful folds. Agnes leans over the table to adjust another knot, guiding it gently into place. The boy mirrors her movements, his knots uneven but deliberate, learning the value of observation, patience, and subtle imperfection. The bobbins click steadily in unison, filling the workshop with hypnotic rhythm. Outside, the streets are quiet, distant noises fading entirely. Inside, the room exists in a bubble of warm light, wax, linen, and deliberate focus. The shadow moves again, deliberate and precise, its presence almost tactile, drawing attention without interference. Agnes leans forward slightly and nudges a stray thread into place. The boy mimics her carefully, internalizing the lesson that even minor disturbances can be addressed with calm and attention. The lace grows knot by knot, thread by thread. Candlelight flickers across the table, walls, and ceiling. Outside, the faint sound of wind against the window is absorbed entirely into the hypnotic rhythm of bobbins, knots, and breath. Agnes leans back slightly, sipping the last of her tea, and surveys the lace. The boy ties another knot, deliberate and careful, and she allows it, knowing that imperfection teaches patience better than perfection ever could. The shadow remains near the edge of the table, watchful but patient, a silent witness to hours of meditation through thread, light, and slow, deliberate movement. The bobbins click steadily, each movement a heartbeat, each knot a quiet statement of calm. Then the shadow shifts one final time, deliberate, slow, and purposeful, moving closer toward the lace. The boy freezes, holding his breath. Agnes leans forward gently, nudging the unfamiliar knot and the nearby thread, integrating the irregularity seamlessly into the growing lace. The lace now contains small deviations, subtle and deliberate, each adding a quiet rhythm to the pattern. The boy watches wide-eyed but calm, absorbing the lesson of patience, observation, and quiet acceptance. Time seems to suspend. The candle flickers gently, casting soft shadows that dance lightly on the walls. The lace continues to grow, knot by knot, thread by thread, each movement deliberate and meditative. The shadow retreats slowly toward the corner, its presence acknowledged and absorbed into the calm rhythm of the room. Agnes leans back, exhaling slowly, and the boy mimics her. The workshop is filled with warmth, wax, linen, candlelight, and a hypnotic click of 48 bobbins, each movement deliberate, patient, and measured. Finally, Agnes surveys the completed lace, the irregular knots fully integrated into the pattern, deliberate deviations that enhance rather than disturb the flow. The boy leans back, breathing slowly, his hands resting lightly over the finished threads. Outside, the night air carries faint sounds of distant streets and wind, but inside, the workshop remains a cocoon of calm, light, wax tea, and deliberate attention. The shadow retreats fully into the corner, patient, deliberate, and watchful, leaving the lace and its creators in quiet harmony. Agnes sips the last of her tea, the boy mirroring her gently. The candlelight flickers softly for the final time as the lace stretches across the table, knot by knot, thread by thread. A quiet testament to hours of patient observation, subtle imperfections, and deliberate calm. The bobbins click one final rhythmic sequence before slowing, synchronized with the slow breathing of the humans in the room. Time seems to fold over itself. Outside, the wind fades and the streets fall silent. And in that perfect moment of quiet, the workshop exists suspended between light and shadow, calm and attention, rhythm and patience. The lace, finished and imperfectly perfect, holds the memory of the hours, the shadow, the slow click of bobbins, the tea, the candlelight, and the deliberate, hypnotic meditation of two humans who moved with patience, observation, and gentle attention. Outside, the night deepens. Inside, all is calm. The candle flickers one last time, then softens to steady glow. Agnes leans back fully and exhales. The boy mirrors her motion. The lace lies finished, delicate, hypnotic, deliberate, a testament to slow hands, quiet patience. An hour suspended in calm, and for the first time the room feels truly still. The shadow, deliberate and patient, retreats fully to the corner and does not move again. Agnes and the boy sit quietly, the bobbins at rest, the candlelight gentle, and the lace complete. Time has passed, hours have slipped by, and yet nothing disturbs the calm rhythm they created. And in that quiet, suspended moment, The workshop feels eternal. In a quiet Flemish workshop of the 14th century, Sister Agnes spends hours creating delicate lace, each knot and thread a meditation in patience and calm. Beside her, a young apprentice learns the rhythm of careful observation, the subtle beauty of imperfection, and the hypnotic magic of slow, deliberate hands. Shadows shift, threads misalign, and the candle flickers, yet through every disturbance, calm and focus guide their movements. By the end, the lace is complete, imperfect, delicate, and alive with the quiet rhythm of human attention and patience. Experience the gentle world of timeless craft, meditative focus, and quiet lessons hidden in each knot. Dim the lights, breathe slowly, and let this story carry you into calm reflection. Subscribe to Stories Before Sleep and join us for more hypnotic, soothing journeys through history, one story at a time. Click the bell and never miss a moment of calm.